Hello everyone. I'm making a second video in a series perhaps on Rav Kook. I don't claim to be an expert on Rav Kook, but I have been reading quite a bit of his output over the last few years. And I want to talk about some passages in a letter that he wrote to a colleague towards the late summer, early autumn of 1909. Now, one of the reasons why I'm choosing this passage from his correspondence has a lot to do with Rav Kook's literary style and written production. Rav Kook was a tremendous genius, one of these people whose mind races much faster than your hand can write it, or nowadays you can type it. And some of his most important works, the most famous works, the Orot Kodesh, are basically edited versions of these notebooks that he kept over the years, in which he would write down the thoughts as they come to him. He himself knew that in that format, the books couldn't be published. They're not really accessible. Eventually, now of course they've been printed as they're directly from the notebooks, because there's so much interest in Rav Kook and so many people are trying to get at just what he had to say. But he himself knew that that couldn't be done, and he entrusted the editing of his notebooks into books that are accessible to if not a general public, at least an educated public who were willing to make the effort to understand it, to his closest disciple, Rav David HaKohen, the Nazir, who had a European academic training. He was actually on his way towards completing a doctorate or beginning a doctorate in Switzerland when he met Rav Kook and latched onto him and abandoned his academic plans, and eventually spent the rest of his life with Rav Kook in the yeshiva Merkaz Harav. Now, he edited these books and put them into a sort of more accessible, more organized fashion, but they're still hard to penetrate. A series of books have come out more recently of lecture notes from discussions given by the Nazir of David Kohen on these books, which are much more penetrable, much more accessible, but at least to my mind, they are much more investigations into the philosophical ideas based on the Nazir's very wide reading in both Jewish and European sources. However, in his correspondence, which has been edited in at least 3 volumes, Rav Kook is different. Rav Kook knew that, that it's one thing to, when you're with yourself and your mind races and you have all these thoughts, and it's another thing when you have to communicate to someone else. And in the correspondence, of course, he is communicating. He's writing something that he wants the recipient of the letter to read and understand. So he makes an effort to make his thoughts and his ideas much clearer. There's still the sort of difficult prose, at least difficult for me, prose of his writing, because it's sort of neither here nor there. It's not the medieval prose of the Tibon translations, or even of the later prose of the Maharal, which is already starting to become a little dense. But it's not the modern Hebrew, which can be, the skilled people can write sort of deep studies in that language. It's a very odd style. I don't know if anyone has studied his style from purely a linguistic point of view, and if there are other people at the time who wrote in this way. But anyway, his thoughts on the topic that I'm talking are much more penetrable and very clear, actually, in this letter. Now, the topic I've described as religion and culture. It parallels the much more well-known topic of church and state that at least the people in my day would have already met in in high school, where you learn about the Holy Roman Emperor's submission to the Pope at Canossa and the Alps, and then fast forward to the American Constitution and the so-called separation of church and state, and even further to Ronald Reagan saying you cannot separate religion and politics. But Rav Kook is not that. Those issues are very much from the point of view of authority. Who has the final say in matters? And as we can see in places like Iran, where there are again parallel systems of religious authority and state authority, that the religious authorities have the final say. The Ayatollah is the supreme leader. But Rav Kook is not interested in political theory and things of that sort. He's interested more in culture. He senses, again in 1909, that there's a great resurgence of culture evident in the arts, especially literature, but other forms of arts, in Europe and in Asia as well. I don't know specifically what artistic schools or what novelists he may have had in mind, how much he knew of these things, but he obviously had some familiarity, and he sensed that there was this great upsurge, which is a human phenomenon, which he really wanted Jews to take part in, but take part in from a distinctly, clearly, unambiguously Jewish perspective. In my previous video, I talked about his respect for all humans and seeing some positive aspects in all forms of worship, because everyone is, whether they know it or not, trying to worship the same God. But this doesn't change a bit with regard to his idea of the Jews being the chosen people and Judaism being superior as a system of thought and as a system of belief to other religions. And so in this passage, he's almost, you can sense his pain that Jews are not taking advantage of this tidal wave of human cultural creativity and expression, and not taking advantage of the wrong way by putting in or producing Jewish works of culture, literature, art, and so forth. And by Jewish, I don't just mean that the person who has written the book or painted the painting was born from Jewish parents or learned the Aleph base in some cheder before they went off on their own, but something with the content of the literature and other forms of expression. The content is deeply, intrinsically, and inseparably informed by Jewish ideas and Jewish beliefs. And here is where he makes the interesting statement. He says that in the resurgence that he sees, he mentions neither the Europeans and the Christians in Europe nor the Muslims of Asia are taking part from a distinctly religious perspective. And he says that's not at all surprising, given the fact that from his point of view, both Islam and Christianity are derivative and misleading and misinformed forms of Judaism. And therefore, he thinks it's a good thing that in Europe and in Asia, in the Christian realms and the Muslim realms, there is no interaction between religion and culture, because that would only harm culture. Culture, he thinks, the cultural resurgence, even among all the Muslims and Christians, is a very positive phenomenon, something good, something that is contributing to humanity. But if it were to be mixed with the religions that these people profess, it would be harmed. It would be stained. And here's where he makes the point that I want to emphasize in this video. The statement he says is Hapilug shel hadat v'chevra na'eh v'ya'eh lahem mashu mezik lanu. That's a Hebrew statement. He says that Hapilug, the separation, the disjuncture between religion and society, is perfectly suited, is fitting, is beautiful even for them, but not for us. Because for them, that is to say, the Jews and the Christians and Muslims in Europe and Islam, because the religion is tainted from his point of view, it would only harm the cultural and the societal creativity that is going on. But for Judaism, since Judaism is the true religion, and Jewish beliefs are true and Jewish values are true, it's a bad thing to have a separation between religion and culture. And his big argument here is that Jews should participate in this resurgence, but do it from, as I said, a distinctly Jewish point of view. So this is really the point I want to make in this video from the point of Rav Kook. He has a very strong admiration, almost a enthusiasm for the cultural resurgence in Europe and in the Ottoman Empire in the very early 20th century, the letter written in 1909. And he knows that this resurgence is basically secular. It's not informed by the religions practiced in those areas, which he thinks is good. And in arguing for Jews to take advantage and get on this tidal wave and ride the wave and produce on their own part works of culture, it should be done with a distinctly Jewish perspective, because the separation between culture and religion, which is a very positive feature when speaking of Christian or Muslim societies, is a negative, harmful feature when speaking of Jewish society. So I thought that this adds an interesting dimension to his thought, and I hope that some of you have gotten something out of hearing this. Thank you very much for your attention.